parents vanish. But the babysitters aren't human. It was a chilly autumn evening when Sarah's parents finally left for their weekend getaway. The air was crisp, and the scent of fallen leaves hung thick in the night. As the car rumbled out of the driveway, Sarah waved goodbye, the excitement of having the house to herself surging within her. At 14, she had long since outgrown the need for a babysitter. But tonight was different. Tonight, her parents had hired one. Someone they claimed was more experienced than the usual teenage girls who were always too busy with their own lives to actually care for Sarah. She'll be here soon. Just be nice, her mother had said, giving her one last kiss on the cheek before closing the door behind her. Alone in the house now, Sarah couldn't help but feel an eerie sense of excitement mixed with unease. She turned the lights off in the living room, preferring the soft glow of a single lamp near the kitchen window. The house creaked with the familiar sounds of old wood, a small comfort that Sarah always took for granted. But tonight, those sounds seemed different, as if they were echoes of something long forgotten. At precisely 7:30, a knock came at the door. Sarah stood up, startled, though she had been expecting it. Her parents had specifically warned her about not answering the door unless the babysitter introduced herself first. With a mix of curiosity and mild annoyance, she opened the door. Standing before her was a woman whose age was hard to pinpoint. She was tall, with sharp features and dark, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through Sarah. Her hair was neatly pulled back into a tight ponytail, and she wore an oversized sweater and jeans. Nothing extraordinary, yet somehow unsettling in its plainness. The woman smiled, but there was something off about it. It was too wide, too eager. "Hi there, I'm Miss Raven," she said, her voice soft but almost unnervingly calm. "I'll be looking after you tonight. Your parents gave me the details." Sarah didn't know what to think. Miss Raven wasn't exactly what she had imagined. She wasn't loud or overly cheerful like some of the other babysitters Sarah had had in the past. Instead, she exuded an air of quiet authority, almost as if she wasn't bothered by anything at all. Okay," Sarah muttered, stepping aside so the woman could come in. "Nice to meet you." Miss Raven didn't reply. She simply nodded as she entered the house, her eyes scanning the interior with a disconcerting intensity. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, but she shrugged it off, reminding herself that it was just nerves. After all, her parents had trusted Miss Raven to watch over her, and she was sure this would be no different from any other night. The babysitter's arrival, however, would mark the beginning of a night Sarah would never forget. As the evening went on, the oddities started piling up. Miss Raven was unsettlingly quiet, only speaking when necessary and never once offering any small talk. She moved around the house with an eerie grace, never stumbling, never faltering. It was as if she was always aware of her surroundings, as if she had memorized every corner of the house before even stepping inside. Sarah tried to pass the time watching TV in the living room, but the flickering of the screen did little to ease her growing discomfort. It wasn't the babysitter's presence that bothered her the most. It was something else. It was the way she would stare at the clock, her eyes never straying from the time, as if waiting for something. When Sarah asked Miss Raven if she wanted to join her in watching a movie, the babysitter gave her a strange smile and replied, "I don't need distractions. You're old enough to entertain yourself." The dismissive tone left Sarah feeling small, but she didn't argue. Instead, she retreated to the couch, pulling a blanket around her shoulders, hoping the warmth would settle the creeping anxiety that had taken root in her chest. Later in the evening, the real terror began. Sarah had gone upstairs to brush her teeth, the clatter of water from the bathroom sink filling the silence. When she returned to her room, something was different. The door to her bedroom was slightly ajar, which she was sure she had closed before leaving. Hesitant, Sarah stepped inside, scanning the room for any sign of the babysitter. But Miss Raven was nowhere to be found. Curiosity gnawed at her, and Sarah crept downstairs, her footsteps muffled against the carpet. As she neared the bottom of the stairs, she noticed something strange. The front door was wide open, the cool night air sweeping in from the outside. But what was even more unsettling was a figure standing just outside, facing away from her. Miss Raven was standing motionless on the porch, her back to the door, staring into the darkness. It wasn't the fact that she was standing there that frightened Sarah, but the way she was standing, rigid, unblinking like a statue. The air around her seemed still, as if the world had stopped, holding its breath. "Miss Raven?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, not even the slightest movement. Just then, Sarah heard a soft creak behind her. She turned quickly, only to find that the door was no longer open. It had silently shut behind her. Heart pounding, she turned back to the porch, but Miss Raven was gone. A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. She was alone, too alone. Trembling, Sarah bolted up the stairs and locked her bedroom door. She could hear the faintest sounds, scraping noises, as if something was dragging against the floor outside her room. Her heart hammered in her chest as she pulled the covers tightly around her. Her eyes darted toward the window, and for a moment, she thought she saw a pair of dark eyes staring back at her from the streetlight below. But when she blinked, the eyes were gone. The sound of something tapping at her window made Sarah jump, and she quickly crawled under the blankets, trying to calm her breath. Was it the wind or something else? She held her breath, listening carefully. There was silence, but then a knock, soft, repeated. It was coming from the inside of her room. The knock grew louder, more insistent. Sarah's breath came out in shallow bursts as she slowly, hesitantly, lifted her head from under the covers. She couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. She searched the room frantically, but there was nothing unusual. Yet the knocking continued, each tap sending her into a deeper state of panic. Tears welled in her eyes, and she clutched her phone, ready to call her parents. But her hands trembled so much she could barely dial the numbers. Just as she was about to press the call button, her phone screen went black. And then, as if on cue, the knocking stopped. The house was silent, dead silent. The silence was deafening. Sarah sat frozen beneath the covers, her phone now useless in her trembling hands. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give her away. The knocking had stopped, but the air felt thick with something else. Something darker. Something that wasn't supposed to be here. The quiet suffocated her, each second stretching longer than the last. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she slowly peered over the edge of the blanket, trying to make sense of the eerie stillness that enveloped her. The room, once a sanctuary of comfort, now felt like a prison, each creak of the house sending waves of fear through her body. What was that knocking? What was in her room? Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket tighter, her nails digging into the fabric. She needed to move. She needed to do something. But what? The door, her bedroom door, which she had locked a moment ago, was now cracked open. A sliver of darkness stretched through the gap, as though the door had been opened just wide enough to let something pass. Sarah's stomach lurched. The door hadn't been opened like that before. She was sure of it. Slowly, she slid out of bed, her legs weak as they barely supported her. She didn't dare take her eyes off the door, as if looking away might somehow invite whatever was waiting outside. With each step, her breathing quickened, but her feet carried her closer to the door as if some invisible force were urging her forward. She reached the door, her hand hovering over the knob. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air thick with a cold, unnatural chill. A low hum vibrated through the walls, a faint sound that seemed to come from nowhere, yet all around her. She couldn't quite place it, but it felt like a warning. Her heart raced as she turned the knob, the sound of it clicking in the stillness like a gunshot in the night. Slowly, she cracked the door open, her breath catching in her throat as she peered into the hallway. Nothing. The hallway was dark, the shadows from the stairs stretching long across the floor. The house felt empty, but somehow it was worse than if it were full. The absence of sound, the absence of movement, made everything feel wrong. Then, in the corner of her eye, she caught something, a movement. It was slight, just a blur at the edge of her vision. She snapped her head toward it. But there was nothing there. Her pulse quickened. Her mind screamed for her to close the door, lock it, and forget about whatever was out there. But something, a strange, unexplainable force, compelled her to step into the hallway. With every step she took, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if the house itself were holding its breath. She crept down the hall, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, half expecting Miss Raven to appear behind her with that unnerving, wide smile. The silence was all-encompassing, and each footstep seemed too loud, echoing against the walls like a cry for help. At the top of the stairs, Sarah stopped. There at the foot of the stairs was the figure of Miss Raven, standing motionless, just as she had been outside earlier. Her back was to Sarah, her body stiff and unmoving, as if she were part of the house itself. Her dark hair seemed to blend with the shadows, and her rigid posture made her look like a statue. The silence that enveloped her was suffocating. "Miss Raven?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. But Miss Raven didn't respond. She didn't even twitch. A chill ran down Sarah's spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman wasn't entirely human. There was something wrong, something unnatural about the way she stood there, so still and unblinking. Suddenly, without warning, Miss Raven turned her head. Her eyes locked onto Sarah's from across the hallway, and the intense gaze sent a wave of terror coursing through Sarah's veins. The smile that spread across Miss Raven's face was not one of kindness. It was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face, her teeth sharp and too white. "Come here, Sarah," Miss Raven said, her voice colder than ice. The words felt wrong, like they didn't belong to her at all. The tone was flat, emotionless, yet there was an edge to it, something menacing beneath the surface. The hair on Sarah's arm stood on end, and without thinking, she bolted back into her room. She slammed the door shut behind her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The knock on the door sounded again, soft at first, then louder, more persistent. She backed away from the door, her heart hammering in her chest. What was happening? Miss Raven. Who was she? What was she? And why was she here? The knocking stopped suddenly, and an eerie silence filled the room once more. Sarah didn't dare approach the door again. Instead, she backed into the corner of the room, her knees giving way as she slid down the wall. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All she could do was sit there, frozen, trapped in the terror that had descended upon her home. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. She remembered the odd way Miss Raven had acted when she first arrived, distant, almost too calm. And now, her strange behavior, standing motionless, her unnatural smile, her cold voice. Suddenly, a thought hit her, sharp and piercing. It wasn't just that Miss Raven was strange. It wasn't just that she had been acting off. There was something far darker at play here. Something far more sinister. This wasn't a babysitter. And before Sarah could even fully comprehend what that meant, she heard it, the sound of footsteps outside her door. Slow, deliberate, each step heavy and measured. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the door handle began to turn. The door handle turned slowly, the metallic click echoing through the room like a death knell. Sarah's body stiffened, her heartbeat ringing in her ears. She didn't dare move, her breath shallow and ragged as she pressed herself further into the corner, her eyes fixed on the door. The room felt impossibly small, the shadows closing in, suffocating her with their presence. The door creaked open just enough for a sliver of darkness to slink into the room. Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't know what was out there, didn't know what Miss Raven had become. But whatever it was closing in on her. "Sarah," came the cold, familiar voice from the other side of the door. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Miss Raven's voice, once soft and soothing, now sent waves of dread crashing over her. It was no longer just a voice. It felt like a command, an unearthly whisper laced with something dark and ancient. She could feel the presence on the other side of the door, something watching her, something waiting. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she held her breath, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Come to me, Sarah. I know you're scared. I know you're afraid of me. But that's okay. You'll understand soon enough." The door creaked again, the faintest sound of figures shifting outside. The light from the hallway flickered through the crack in the door, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. The silence that followed was unbearable, so thick Sarah could almost taste it. Finally, the footsteps began again, slow, deliberate, dragging across the floor. The unmistakable sound of boots scraping against wood. Miss Raven was getting closer. Each footfall sent a shiver up Sarah's spine, as if the very air around her was being sucked into a void, leaving nothing but emptiness and dread. Her mind raced. She couldn't stay here. She had to get out. But where could she go? What could she do? There was no escape from the suffocating grip of whatever force had taken hold of the house. Suddenly, the room grew colder, so cold that Sarah could see her breath in the air. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, and her teeth began to chatter involuntarily. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth, but it was no use. The chill was beyond her control, beyond the cold outside. Then there was the sound of a low laugh, a laugh that wasn't Miss Raven's. It was deep, guttural, layered with an unnatural echo. The sound reverberated through the walls, filling the room with a bone-chilling vibration. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized that Miss Raven wasn't alone. There was something else here, something much worse. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything fell completely still again. And then the door swung open as if pushed by an invisible hand. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Miss Raven, her face now contorted into something unrecognizable. Her eyes were wide and black, voids that seemed to suck in the light around them, and her smile was stretched far beyond human proportions, exposing teeth too sharp, too white. But it wasn't just Miss Raven. Standing behind her, in the shadowed corridor, was a figure, a hulking, twisted silhouette, its form barely discernible in the dim light. It had an unnatural presence, as if it were made of the very darkness itself. "Sarah," Miss Raven's voice came again, but now it was layered with something darker, deeper. "It's time for you to join us." Before Sarah could react, she felt a force, strong, cold, and suffocating, grip her by the chest. It wasn't a physical touch, but it felt like an invisible hand squeezing her heart, pulling her toward the door. She tried to scream, to fight back, but her body wouldn't obey. Her legs were weak, her breath quick and shallow, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the grotesque figures that stood before her. "Come now," Miss Raven purred, her voice slipping into an unnatural, sing-song tone. "You'll understand soon enough. There's no turning back now." The door to the hallway seemed to widen, stretching impossibly wide, until Sarah could see the entire hallway. The walls were dripping with something black, viscous, like oil, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The house felt alive, like it was breathing with a life of its own. Sarah wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. She was paralyzed, trapped by whatever invisible force held her in place. She tried to move, but her legs wouldn't respond. Her body refused to fight, as if it knew the terror was inevitable, as if it knew that escape was impossible. And then the figure in the hallway took a step forward. It was massive, hulking, its form shifting and rippling in ways that defied logic. The shadows seemed to warp around it, twisting in ways that made Sarah dizzy. The creature's features were barely visible, just glowing, pale eyes that burned like coals in the dark. It was an abomination, something born of nightmare and darkness. Miss Raven stepped aside, her unnervingly wide smile still stretched across her face. "Go ahead," she whispered, her voice now a distorted rasp. "He's waiting for you." The creature took another step, and Sarah felt the air grow heavier, suffocating her. It was coming toward her, its eyes fixed on hers with a predatory gleam. She had to run. The moment she tried to move, everything shifted. The house seemed to distort, the walls warping, the floor shifting beneath her feet. The ground buckled, and Sarah stumbled, falling to her knees as the weight of the house's unnatural pull bore down on her. And then she heard a voice. It was faint at first, distant, like a whisper from deep within the house. "Run." It was a voice she didn't recognize, but it felt familiar. Without thinking, Sarah pushed herself to her feet. She turned and bolted toward the stairs, her feet pounding the wooden floor with all the strength she could muster. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears as she dashed down the hall, her eyes locked on the staircase. The creature was gaining on her. She could hear its heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, and growing closer with every passing second. Sarah reached the stairs and took them two at a time, her legs shaking with the effort. But as she reached the top, she heard the whisper again, clearer now. Downstairs. Go. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. She hesitated for a second, her mind spinning with terror and confusion. But there was no time to think. She ran back down the stairs, the creature's footsteps behind her, and she burst into the living room. And then the lights went out. The darkness swallowed the room in an instant. The lights had flickered out, leaving Sarah in pitch blackness. The kind of darkness where the air feels thick, like it's pressing against your skin. She could barely see her own hands in front of her face as she stood frozen in the middle of the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last, as her mind struggled to comprehend the nightmarish events that had unfolded so far. Then she heard it, a sound, faint but unmistakable, like the soft scrape of nails against wood. It was coming from the direction of the hallway, a low, dragging noise that grew louder with every passing second. It sent an ice-cold shiver through her body. Sarah, the voice was no longer Miss Raven's. This time it was a deeper growl, guttural and laced with something unnatural. The creature was here, somewhere in the darkness. The sound of the dragging stopped, and for a moment, everything felt eerily still. But then, a faint flicker, a glimmer of light broke through the blackness. A distant, flickering glow that seemed to come from the hallway. It was the last thing Sarah needed to see. She knew what that light meant. It wasn't normal light. It was something far worse, something that had no place in this world. The house groaned around her, the walls creaking as if they were alive. The house was shifting, changing. It wasn't the structure she had grown up in. This place was a living, breathing thing, a malevolent force feeding off her fear. And now it wanted her. Sarah stumbled back, her feet catching on the edge of the coffee table. She caught herself just before falling, her palms slamming onto the floor in an attempt to steady herself. The moment her hands hit the coldwood, the light flickered again, closer now, sharper. It was no longer coming from a hallway. It was coming from the living room, right in front of her. There, in the center of the room, stood a shadow, a figure barely discernible in the dim light. Its shape was twisted, contorted, as if it were trying to hold itself together. But it was impossible to deny. It was the creature. Its black, hollow eyes stared at her from the darkness, glowing with an unnatural, sickly hue. It was no longer hiding. The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping to levels that were almost unbearable. Sarah's breath became visible, misting the air in front of her, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the creature. It was watching her, its head tilting to one side, as if studying her like a specimen under a microscope. "Come to me, Sarah." The voice came again, but this time it was a chorus. Many voices layered over one another, speaking at once. "You belong with us. Come to us." Sarah's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to move. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't stay in the same room with it. The door was right there, the door to the outside. But before she could take a step, the light flared up again, this time blindingly bright. The creature hissed, its form shrinking back into the shadows. It recoiled like a vampire, the light scorching its flesh, but it didn't retreat. No, it didn't need to. "Foolish girl," it hissed, its voice full of contempt. "You cannot run from us. You will never escape." The light flickered one last time, and then went out. Darkness. Sarah felt the world around her spinning, the walls closing in. The house was shifting again, the floors moving beneath her feet, as if the house itself were alive and aware of her every move. She had to get out. She had to find a way out. With every ounce of strength she had left, she turned on her heel and ran toward the door. But as her hand reached for the doorknob, the house shook violently. The ground beneath her feet cracked, the very foundations of the building trembling with an unnatural force. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but the creature's shadow moved closer. She could hear its breathing now, slow, deep, and somehow hungry. "Sarah." The voice called again, this time almost tender, like a whisper meant only for her. "You were always meant to be one of us. You are part of the house now." The walls of the living room began to warp, the shapes of furniture stretching and twisting like they were made of rubber. It was as if the house was consuming everything, taking its surroundings and distorting them into something else. The very air was thick with a sense of dread, and Sarah felt it in her bones. This was no longer just about Miss Raven. The house had a will of its own, a terrible, dark will. Her mind raced, but there was no place to hide, no way out. She needed to think, to act, to fight back. The light in the room flickered again, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. She could see the creature clearly now. Its skin was black and oily, glistening in the dim light. Its eyes were empty pits, a vast darkness that seemed to swallow everything it gazed upon. The shadow in the corner of the room stretched, expanding, until it seemed to fill the space entirely. Then there was a noise, a faint, almost imperceptible sound that came from the farthest corner of the room. It was a voice Sarah recognized, a voice she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Sarah, her eyes darted to the corner, her heart racing in her chest. It was her mother's voice, soft, gentle, calling her name. "Mom!" Sarah's voice cracked as she stepped forward, the fear in her heart suddenly mixing with hope. Could it really be her? Had her parents returned? "Come here, sweetheart," the voice coaxed. "We've been waiting for you. It's safe now. Come to us." Sarah stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached the corner. But as she drew closer, she saw the truth. It wasn't her mother. It was another figure, one of the dark shadows. And standing beside it was another, and another, all of them now crowding the room, circling her. "Join us," the shadows whispered in unison. "You are one of us now, forever." Sarah froze. The truth hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just stuck in a haunted house. The house was alive, and it was feeding on her fear. And now it had her. She had no choice. She could never leave. Her body moved, though it wasn't her mind that was in control anymore. The house had claimed her. And the last thing Sarah saw before everything went dark was Miss Raven, standing in the corner with that wide, unholy smile, watching her, waiting for her to join them. Sarah woke to a sharp, blinding light. Her head throbbed, and her body felt heavy, as if it were being pressed into the very ground beneath her. The air was thick with a cold, damp feeling that clung to her skin, and for a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Her senses slowly returned, but they didn't help her make sense of what had happened. She felt disoriented, her thoughts fuzzy and scattered. When she tried to move, a sharp pain shot through her chest, and she gasped, trying to steady herself. She realized she was no longer in her room. She wasn't even in the house anymore. The place she found herself in was unfamiliar, a cold, vast expanse of stone walls and flickering, dim lights hanging from the ceiling like dying stars. The air was stale, suffocating, and the scent of mildew and decay filled her nostrils. She was surrounded by darkness, but the faint light from the overhead lamps illuminated just enough to show her the barren, cavernous space she was in. Her heart hammered in her chest as the memories came flooding back. The house, Miss Raven, the creature, the shadows closing around her. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs felt weak, heavy. When she looked down, she saw that her hands were no longer normal. They were covered in dark, thick veins, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The skin on her arms and legs had taken on a strange, sickly gray hue. She touched her face and felt coldness where warmth should have been. "No!" Her voice cracked as she whispered the word. She didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was clear. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. The shadows around her moved, and she froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. The figures in the room were stirring, slowly becoming visible in the dim light. There were shapes, dark, featureless silhouettes, that loomed over her. They weren't human. They were something else entirely. They didn't have faces, only eyes, black, empty, and endless, like portals into some kind of nightmare realm. "Welcome," a voice hissed from the shadows. It was familiar, too familiar. It was Miss Raven's voice, but this time it had an edge to it, something deeper, darker. "You've joined us now, Sarah. You were always meant to. You just didn't know it." Sarah's breath quickened. She tried to stand, but her legs felt like they were cemented to the floor. Her mind raced, but it wasn't her thoughts that were controlling her. The house, the entity that had taken control of everything, was pulling her in. "Why?" she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "Why me?" A shadow detached itself from the others and slowly approached her. It was a figure of Miss Raven, but her form was distorted, shapeless, no longer the woman who had appeared at Sarah's door. Her eyes were hollow, blackened pits, her mouth an unnatural gape that stretched far too wide. "You're not the first, Miss Raven. No, it whispered, and you won't be the last. This house, this place, it feeds. It draws in those like you, those with fear in their hearts, those who don't belong. You were chosen, Sarah. The house needs you. We need you." The word sent a jolt of terror through Sarah. Her vision blurred, and she felt her heartbeat quicken as the weight of her reality began to sink in. This was a trap. A horrible, inescapable trap. She wasn't just stuck in a haunted house. She was part of it. She was becoming part of something far darker, far more twisted than she had ever imagined. "Please," Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. "I don't want this. I don't want to be like you. I want to go home." Miss Raven's form twisted as she let out a low, raspy laugh. The sound echoed to the cavernous room, like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard. "You can't go home," the creature spat. "There is no home anymore. Not for you." It moved closer, and Sarah recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she backed away, the ground beneath her shifted. The walls around her seemed to pulse, as if the very structure of the place was alive, and it was feeding on her fear. The figure of Miss Raven loomed over her now, her face shifting and distorting, melding with the shadows. The eyes of the other creatures, those silent, formless shapes, glowed faintly as they stared at Sarah, their hollow gaze fixated on her. "You belong to this house now, Sarah," Miss Raven said, her voice slipping into something colder, more commanding. "You will stay here forever, a part of us. You will feed the house, and in return, you will be one with us." Sarah closed her eyes, her mind screaming in resistance. This wasn't right. It couldn't be. But as she opened them again, she saw the truth staring back at her in the darkness. The creatures, the shadows, the house itself, all twisted together in a horrifying unity. She was trapped, caught in the clutches of something ancient, something terrible. But then a thought struck her. What if she wasn't the only one? "Wait," she whispered, her mind racing. "What about my parents? Where are they? They were supposed to be. They left. They were—" Miss Raven's twisted smile stretched wider, her hollow eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Your parents? They're part of the house too, Sarah. Just like you. They've always been part of it. They'll never leave." The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her parents, her real parents, were gone. They had been taken, absorbed into the house, just like she was being absorbed. They hadn't left for a weekend getaway. They hadn't gone anywhere at all. They had been drawn into this nightmare, just as she had been. But there was one thing Miss Raven hadn't counted on. As the creature moved closer, Sarah felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she had. It was like a spark of defiance, a small but powerful flicker of hope in the depths of her fear. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at Miss Raven and the creatures surrounding her. "You won't have me," Sarah said, her voice trembling but steady. "I won't be like you." Miss Raven paused, her expression shifting. The other creatures stirred, their movements slow and deliberate. "You think you can escape?" Miss Raven's voice was a low, mocking growl. "There is no escape. You belong here. Forever." But Sarah's mind was already racing. She wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to let the house consume her completely. With a sudden burst of strength, she pushed herself to her feet, her hands shaking with adrenaline as she looked around the room. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she had to find something, anything that could give her a chance. She felt the pressure of the darkness closing in, the weight of the shadows pressing down on her. But in that moment, a single, terrible truth emerged. The house wasn't just feeding on her fear. It was feeding on her hope, too. But she wouldn't give up. Not yet. The tension in the room felt like it could snap at any moment. Sarah's breath was ragged. her pulse a deafening thrum in her ears as she stared down the creatures that surrounded her. The cold stone walls seemed to close in, the air thicker now, as if it were alive and suffocating her. The shadows stretched long across the floor, twisting unnaturally like dark tendrils reaching for her. The creatures were waiting, watching, silent, their black, hollow eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Miss Raven, or whatever she become, stood in front of them, her smile widening, a grotesque parody of warmth. "You don't belong here, Sarah," Miss Raven whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You never did, but you will. You'll become part of this place, just like the others." Sarah clenched her fists at her sides, her mind racing. She couldn't give in, not now, not ever. The darkness, the fear, the terror that consumed her, none of it mattered anymore. It was a fight for her very soul now, a fight she couldn't afford to lose. But she could feel the weight of their presence closing in, suffocating her. The house was no longer just a building. It was a living entity, a force that fed on fear, on despair. And Sarah could feel it, wrapping around her heart, twisting it into a cold knot. But something inside her, some flicker of defiance, pushed back. She wasn't going to let this place take her. She needed to act. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might give her a chance. Her gaze landed on the walls. The stone was cracked, old, as if it had been here for centuries, perhaps even longer. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to stop this. But how? What could she do against something so ancient, so powerful? Then she saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible glow at the far end of the room, just beyond the reach of the creatures. It was a doorway, one she hadn't noticed before. It shimmered with a faint light, like a crack in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the only chance she had. With a surge of determination, Sarah took a step forward, her legs unsteady but her resolve stronger than ever. The creatures shifted, their eyes narrowing, their movements slow and deliberate, but they didn't move to stop her. Miss Raven's twisted smile faltered for a split second, as if she had anticipated Sarah's hesitation. "You think you can escape?" Miss Raven's voice was low, laced with venom. "You think you can run from us? From the house?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't afford to waste time on words. She had to move. As she stumbled toward the glowing doorway, the floor beneath her trembled. The walls groaned as if they were alive, shifting and twisting, trying to trap her, but she kept moving. Every step was a battle against the dark force pulling her back, but she pressed on, her mind focused on nothing but the light ahead. She reached the doorway, her breath ragged in her chest. Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame, and for a moment she hesitated. What if it was just another trap? What if it was a part of the house's twisted game? But she couldn't think about that now. She didn't have a choice. With one last, desperate push, she stepped through the doorway. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, a deafening scream filled the air. It was a sound so horrible, so filled with anguish, that it seemed to vibrate through her very bones. The house shook violently around her, the walls cracking, the floor splintering beneath her feet. The creatures roared in fury, their eyes blazing with rage. But Sarah didn't stop. She couldn't. She ran, her heart pounding in her chest as she sprinted to the narrow passageway that lay beyond the doorway. It twisted and turned, the walls pressing in on her from all sides. But she kept going. The scream of the house echoed in her ears, a constant reminder that she wasn't free yet, that she was still being hunted. And then the passage opened up. Before her lay an empty room, vast and empty, with no windows and only a single door at the far end. The air was still, but there was something about the room, something different, something that felt out of place. The silence here was thick, unnatural. She didn't think twice. She ran for the door, her footsteps echoing in the stillness, louder than she had ever heard before. But as she neared the door, a cold wave of fear washed over her. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The door. It was wrong. Before she could reach it, the room began to shift. The walls seemed to fold inward, and the door at the far end of the room began to warp and bend, like a living thing. The floor beneath her feet cracked, sending splinters of wood up into the air. The shadows began to gather, swirling around her like a storm. It wasn't the house that was chasing her. It was something far worse. The creatures, the ones that had once surrounded her, were here. They were behind her, ahead of her, their cold, lifeless eyes staring at her from every corner of the room. Miss Raven was there, too, standing at the center of the room with her twisted smile, her dark eyes gleaming with cruel delight. "No one escapes the house, Sarah," Miss Raven said, her voice now a guttural growl, dripping with malice. "You belong here. You are ours now, and you will always be ours." Sarah's breath hitched in her chest, but she didn't falter. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of the house closing in on her. It was suffocating, all-consuming, but she refused to give up. With a scream of defiance, Sarah turned toward the center of the room and faced Miss Raven. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know what was happening. All she knew was that she had one chance, one moment to make it right. A strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't terror. It was something else. Hope. The shadows recoiled, the light flickering around her, and for a fleeting moment, the walls of the room seemed to shift. The creatures hissed and backed away. Miss Raven's smile faltered. The warmth inside Sarah grew stronger, a spark of light that illuminated the darkness. It was her defiance, her will to live. The house couldn't feed on her anymore, not as she fought back. "You can't have me," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking but strong. "I'm not yours." The light within her flared, and for a brief, fleeting moment, she could hear the screams of the house as it began to crack and tear apart around her. And then everything went black. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the room, no longer in the house. The world around her was different, still silent. She felt the cool night air against her skin, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Slowly, her senses returned one by one as she realized she was lying on cold, damp ground. The earth beneath her fingertips was solid, real. She blinked a few times, tried to adjust to the faint moonlight that filtered through the trees above. The forest. She was in a forest. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sat up, her mind spinning with confusion. How had she gotten here? How had she escaped? She glanced around, expecting to see the twisted shadows of the house. But there was nothing. Only trees, stretching high into the night, their dark branches swaying in the breeze. It was quiet, eerily quiet. The only sound was the wind whispering through the leaves. Sarah pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaky, but she forced herself to stand. She was free. She had to be. The house, the creatures, Miss Raven, had all been left behind. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't trapped anymore. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling of freedom began to slip away, replaced by a gnawing unease. The forest, despite its stillness, felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. And then she heard it, a rustling, soft, barely noticeable at first, but then it grew louder. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. Sarah's pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. She turned, eyes scanning the darkness between the trees. The rustling grew louder, but it didn't sound like one person. It was a movement, a shifting, a swarming, like there were many things, many creatures hidden in the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat. No, not again. Then she saw them. Figures, just out of reach of the moonlight, barely visible, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. Tall, unnatural. Their eyes gleamed, reflecting the faint light. The creatures from the house, the ones that had hunted her, were here, too. They had followed her. Somehow, they had found her. But what truly chilled her to the bone was the sight of Miss Raven among them. She stepped forward, her form emerging from the shadows like a ghost, her twisted smile wide across her face. The creatures flanked her, their eyes fixed on Sarah, and with each step they took, Sarah felt a deep, suffocating dread creeping over her. "You can't escape us, Sarah." Miss Raven's voice rang out, soft but sharp, like a whisper in the wind. "We're always with you. The house never lets go." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. She tried to run, but her body felt weak, like it was dragging her down, and the creatures were closing in. She had made it out of the house. She had escaped its grasp. But it had followed her into the world outside. It was all a part of the same nightmare. There was no escaping it. No escaping them. But then, something strange happened. As Sarah turned, her eyes caught a flicker of light, bright, shining through the trees in the distance. It wasn't a natural light. It was pulsing, erratic like a beacon. For a moment, she stood frozen. The creatures were getting closer, their gnarled faces leering at her from the shadows. But the light seemed like a sign. Something, anything, that could lead her away from the horror, closing in. She ran toward it, not looking back, her feet pounding against the earth, her chest heaving. The creatures didn't follow her immediately. There was something about that light, something that held their attention, but she didn't care. She needed to reach it. She had to. The distance between her and the light seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows thickening around her, but the light grew brighter, closer, until finally she reached it. And when she did, she stopped short. The light wasn't a street lamp. It wasn't a beacon. It was a door, standing alone in the middle of the forest. Its frame was glowing, a pale, ethereal light radiating from the edges. The wood warped and twisted like the house itself. But unlike the house, unlike the creatures, this door didn't seem to be part of the darkness. It seemed different. It seemed to be a way out. Without a second thought, Sarah rushed toward it, her heart pounding as she reached for the handle. She didn't care what it led to. Anything was better than the creatures that followed her. She pulled the door open, the heavy wood creaking as it shifted on its hinges. And as she stepped through the doorway, she felt something shift. The world around her seemed to change, as though the very fabric of reality was bending and warping around her. The door slammed shut behind her. Suddenly, she was standing in a familiar place. Her room, her childhood room. It was the same as she remembered. Clean, untouched, familiar. But everything felt off. The air was stale, the silence oppressive. She turned in a circle, looking at the familiar walls, the faded wallpaper, the old wooden dresser that had been in her room for years. But something was wrong. The door she had just passed through was gone. The room was exactly as it had been, but there were no windows, no way out. And then she heard it, the familiar, faint rustling of movement, the sound of footsteps, not in the distance, but in the room with her. Slowly, Sarah turned around, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was Miss Raven. She was no longer twisted, no longer a shadow. She was standing there, fully formed, with that same eerie smile stretched across her face. "Welcome home, Sarah," Miss Raven said, her voice soft and sweet. And the creatures, the ones that had followed her through the door, they were here, too, emerging from the corners of the room, filling the space. "You're back where you belong," Miss Raven said, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. Sarah's pulse quickened. The walls closed in, the door gone, the creatures watching her like hungry wolves. She had thought she'd escaped. She thought the house had let her go. But now she realized that it hadn't. It had brought her back. She was never truly free. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the reality of her situation settled in. The room around her, the familiar, safe space she had once called home, had become a prison. The creatures moved toward her, their eyes fixed, unblinking, as if they knew the final chapter was unfolding. Miss Raven's smile never wavered, twisted and unsettling in its unnatural stillness. "Welcome back, Sarah," she purred, her voice like silk, but colder than any ice. "You thought you could escape us, didn't you? You thought you could outrun your destiny." Sarah's mind raced, searching for some way out, some shred of hope to cling to. But the door was gone, the walls closing in on her. She felt the darkness, the weight of the house's curse, pressing down on her chest. There was no escape. She was trapped. The creatures, those unnatural beings, were closing in now, their limbs too long, their eyes too empty. Their movements were slow but deliberate, each step bringing them closer to Sarah. She could feel their gaze, cold and hungry, crawling over her skin. The very air seemed thick with their presence, and the world around her felt like it was disintegrating. "Please, I don't want this." I don't belong here. Sarah's voice trembled as she took a step back, but her legs felt like lead. Let me go, please. Miss Raven tilted her head slightly, the grotesque smile still in place. You never belonged anywhere, Sarah. You were always ours. From the moment you set foot in that house, you were part of this, part of us. Sarah backed away, her eyes darting around the room, desperate for a way out. The room was closing in on her, the walls narrowing, the air thickening. The creatures were closer now, their breath ragged and wet, their eyes gleaming with an insatiable hunger. The house had followed her, yes, but more than that, it had shaped her. It had manipulated her fear, her doubt, her deepest insecurities. It had made her believe that escape was possible, that freedom was within her grasp, only to tear it all away the moment she thought she was free. It had been playing with her all along. You think you're special? Miss Raven's voice was soft but mocking, almost sadistic. You're just another lost soul, Sarah. Another victim of the house. There's no escape for you. No escape for anyone. The creatures circled her now, their movements deliberate, like predators closing in on their prey. Sarah could feel her heart racing, each beat pounding in her ears. She was cornered, helpless, and no matter how much she fought, no matter how much she struggled, she couldn't outrun what was about to happen. But then, a flicker of something unfamiliar, began to stir inside her. It was a faint, almost imperceptible feeling at first, like the smallest spark in the darkest of nights. Hope, the smallest, fragile ember of hope. She wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She wasn't going to let the house have her. She wasn't going to let Miss Raven win. There had to be something, anything, she could do. Suddenly, something inside her shifted. The house trembled. The walls groaned in protest, and the creatures froze, their heads snapping toward Sarah. The air around her became thick with static, like a storm was building on the horizon. You can't, Miss Raven began, her voice cutting off as she took a step back, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. What are you doing? Sarah's hand shot out in front of her, and she felt a surge of energy rush through her body. It was as if the house itself had become her ally, as if she had finally tapped into something hidden deep within. The walls trembled once more, this time in fear, as the very foundation of the house seemed to buckle under the force of Sarah's will. The creatures hissed, their forms writhing in pain as the energy around Sarah grew stronger. The shadows that had once surrounded her now recoiled, retreating as if they couldn't bear the light that was pouring from her. The house seemed to shake violently, its foundations cracking, as if it were being torn apart from the inside out. No! Miss Raven shrieked, her voice laced with panic. You can't. But Sarah wasn't listening. The energy inside her surged, and with it, a sense of power, real power. She could feel it now, flowing through her like a current, filling her with strength and clarity. The house wasn't just a place. It was a force, and she had been part of it. But now she had taken control. She thrust her hands forward, pushing against the dark energy that surrounded her. The creatures screeched in agony, their forms distorting, twisting the air as if they were being pulled apart by invisible forces. Miss Raven was the last to fall back, her twisted face contorting in rage and disbelief. You think you can fight this? She snarled. You think you can destroy what's been here for centuries? Sarah's eyes burned with determination. Yes, I do. With a final, forceful push, the energy inside her exploded outward and the room shattered. The walls cracked and splintered, the ceiling caving in as the house began to collapse. The creatures screamed, their forms disintegrating into dust, their twisted bodies vanishing into the void. Miss Raven was no different. She howled in pain as her form dissolved, her voice lost the darkness. And then, everything went silent. Sarah collapsed to the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the world around her slowly started to settle. The air was still now, no longer thick with the oppressive energy of the house. She looked around, but there was nothing left. The creatures, the shadows, the walls. They were all gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was truly alone. She was free. The forest, once suffocating and filled with terror, was now quiet, peaceful. The moonlight bathed the ground in soft light, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Sarah pushed herself up, her body weak, but her spirit stronger than ever. She had escaped, but as she stood there, staring into the distance, she couldn't help but wonder, what was left? What had she really escaped? The house had been destroyed, but had it been truly vanquished? Or had it merely shifted, waiting for the next victim to fall into its grasp? She didn't know. But for now, she could breathe. For now, she was free. The wind whispered through the trees, and Sarah walked away, her footsteps light against the earth. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Sarah's heart had barely begun to slow from the chaos of the night when a strange unease settled in. She walked deeper into the forest, the moonlight now fully illuminating her path. The rustling of the leaves had turned from comforting to unsettling, like the whispering voices of something just out of reach. For all the power she had felt earlier, for all the destruction she had caused to the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. Something from the house, something darker. She paused, wiping her brow, her mind still reeling from everything she had just experienced. How had she escaped? How had she broken free? She had used the power within her, a power she hadn't known existed. It had come to her when she needed it the most. But what did it mean? Had the house truly been destroyed, or had it simply let her go, knowing she would return? Like an inevitable pull on a pendulum, her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the forest seemed to stretch on forever. There was no sign of the creatures, no shadow of Miss Raven. The house was gone, but somehow it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something new. She quickened her pace, moving faster now, the weight of her thoughts pressing against her. She had to get out of the forest, back to civilization, back to safety. But as she walked, the trees seemed to close in around her. The familiar path she had thought she was following now appeared distorted, like a twisted mirror reflecting her own confusion. Her heart pounded again as the air grew heavy, dense with the feeling that something was wrong. Something that had been left behind was still lingering, waiting for her. A low rumble broke through the silence. The ground beneath her feet trembled, sending ripples through the earth. The sky above darkened suddenly, as if a storm was rolling in. But there were no clouds, no wind, just the sense of something watching her from all sides. Sarah stopped in her tracks, her breath shallow. She looked around, her pulse quickening as she scanned the dark trees. Something wasn't right. This wasn't normal. There was no escape from the house, no escape from what she had just been through. And then it happened. A figure appeared out of nowhere. It was cloaked in shadow, its body barely visible. But Sarah knew who it was even before it stepped fully into moonlight. Miss Raven. But she wasn't the twisted creature she had been in the house. She was different. Her form was now solid. Yet there was something unsettling about her. Her face was pale, too pale, her eyes still hollow but with an intense, predatory gleam. She was wearing the same black dress, but now it seemed to float around her as if it were made of smoke. Her movements were unnaturally fluid, like she was drifting in and out of reality itself. "You thought you were free, didn't you?" Miss Raven's voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to echo through the forest. Sarah backed up, her pulse racing. You should be gone. I destroyed the house. I stopped you." Miss Raven tilted her head, a wicked smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Oh, Sarah, the house was never just a house. It was a doorway, a gateway, and you were never meant to leave." Sarah's breath caught. She felt the ground beneath her shift again, as though the earth itself was moving in rhythm with Miss Raven's words. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches reaching toward her as if they were part of the same dark force. "The house wasn't just a place," Miss Raven continued, her voice soft but full of malice. "It was a prison, but not for me, for you." "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "No, I'm not going back there. I can't." "You already are," Miss Raven said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You see, Sarah, your journey didn't end when you escaped the house. It was only just beginning, because you're not just a victim. You are the key. The house never truly let go of you, And neither can you. The world around Sarah seemed to darken, the trees fading into blackness, and the air grew thick again. The very ground felt alive with an energy that made her skin crawl. The power she had felt earlier, the light she had summoned to destroy the house, hadn't dissipated. It hadn't been hers to control. It had been something that had used her, something that had made her believe she could escape. But the truth was darker, much darker than she could have ever imagined. "You are one of us now, Sarah," Miss Raven said, stepping closer, her voice now an insistent whisper that seemed to come from all directions. "You belong to the house, and it will never let you go." Sarah stumbled backward, her mind reeling. She had fought so hard. She had destroyed the house. She had thought she was free. But now it was clear the house wasn't just a physical structure. It was alive. It had always been alive. And it had chosen her. "Why me?" Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Why was I chosen?" Miss Raven's smile deepened, her face twisting with glee. "Because you were afraid. And fear feeds us. It keeps us strong. It keeps us alive. And now you are bound to us. Forever." Sarah felt a cold chill wash over her, her body trembling with the weight of the revelation. She was no longer just Sarah. She was a part of the house, a part of something ancient, something that had existed long before she had ever set foot inside its walls. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "This isn't me. I'm not like you." Miss Raven's laughter filled the air, echoing through the trees, through Sarah's mind. "Oh, Sarah, you're already more like me than you think. You've always been." The forest around her began to fade. The darkness consumed her vision, and the ground beneath her feet shifted once again. The house, the creatures, Miss Raven, they were no longer just memories. They were a part of her now, and she was a part of them. The world around Sarah began to dissolve into a blur. The forest, once so vivid and terrifying, faded into darkness. The sound of the wind, the rustling leaves, and the distant howls of the creatures were swallowed by an all-encompassing silence. She felt her body shift as if she were being pulled into something far deeper than mere darkness. And then, as if emerging from the depths of some unseen abyss, the house appeared. It wasn't the same as before. It didn't stand on the hill. It didn't sit in a distant, forgotten part of the world. It was everywhere, all around her. It was the air she breathed, the ground beneath her feet, the shadows that clung to the corners of her vision. It was no longer just a building. It was a presence, a vast, suffocating entity that wrapped its tendrils around her soul. Sarah's heart pounded as she stumbled back, her eyes wide with horror. She had thought she had escaped, thought she had destroyed the house. But the truth was far worse. The house had never been a place. It had never been a structure of stone and wood. It was something much darker. It was a prison for souls. And now it had claimed her. The walls rose around her, towering and endless, stretching far beyond the limits of her vision. The air was thick, heavy with an oppressive energy that clung to her skin. She could feel the house's pulse, the slow, rhythmic beating of something ancient, something alive. It throbbed in her chest, in her very blood. And at the center of it all was Miss Raven. She was no longer the twisted figure from before, no longer a mere shadow of darkness. She was radiant now, her form almost ethereal, floating before Sarah. The hollow eyes were gone. In their place was a power far more terrible. Miss Raven was the embodiment of the house itself, the source of its terrible strength. "Welcome home, Sarah," Miss Raven's voice echoed through the air. It was no longer a whisper. It was a force, deep and resonant, like thunder rolling through a storm. "You finally realize the truth. The house is not just a place you enter. It is a fate you inherit. It is a force that consumes, devours, and renews itself through fear, through souls like yours. And you, Sarah, are no different from all the others who have come before you." Sarah's chest tightened as she stumbled backward. The reality of it hit her harder than anything before. She hadn't just been a victim of the house. She had been chosen to become one of its many parts, one of its many echoes. She had been the key to its rebirth. The room around her twisted and contorted, the walls closing in as she backed away. The darkness pressed in from every side, the house pulsing with its hunger. She could feel it now, all around her, inside her. It was in her veins. It was in her breath. No! Sarah's voice trembled as she shook her head, trying to push back the terrifying truth. This isn't who I am. I won't let it be. I won't be part of this. Miss Raven's figure flickered and shimmered, her smile widening, her eyes gleaming. You never had a choice, Sarah. You were never meant to be free. We've always been waiting for you. With a sudden movement, Miss Raven raised her hand, and the shadows seemed to rise up in response. The walls, the floor, the air, they all shifted as if the house itself were alive, bending to her will. The creatures, the ones Sarah had thought were destroyed, began to materialize from the darkness, their eyes glowing with a ravenous hunger. They circled around her, each one waiting for the moment when she would join them. Do you see now, Sarah? Miss Raven's voice was soft, but the power in it was undeniable. You are not the first. You won't be the last. There will always be another soul to feed the house, another fear to feed us. And you, my dear, you are the perfect offering. Sarah's mind raced as the terror of what was happening threatened to consume her. She had fought so hard to survive, to escape, but all her struggles, all her hope had been in vain. The house wasn't just a building. It was a cycle of fear and suffering that fed on the souls of those who dared to enter, those who tried to escape. And now she was part of its eternal hunger. But even as a weight of despair settled over her, a flicker of defiance burned within her. She wasn't ready to give up. She wasn't ready to be consumed. There had to be another way. Is this what you want, Miss Raven? Sarah's voice was hoarse, but steady. She looked at the creatures circling her, their eyes glinting with predatory glee. You want to feed on me? You want to feed on my fear? You want me to be part of this, part of you? Miss Raven's smile faltered for a brief moment, and that was all Sarah needed. The spark of defiance inside her flared brighter, stronger. The house, the creatures, the fear, it had no hold on her. Not anymore. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Sarah reached deep within herself. The power she had felt earlier, the energy she had used to fight back, surged once more. But this time, it wasn't just the house she fought. It wasn't just Miss Raven or the creatures. It was herself. She had to break the cycle. She had to break free. With a forceful cry, Sarah released everything she had. A blinding light erupted from within her, filling the room, flooding the house. The darkness recoiled, the creatures screeched in pain, and Miss Raven's form twisted in agony. No! Miss Raven shrieked. You can't! But it was too late. The light spread, consuming everything. The walls of the house cracked, splintered, and shattered. The ground beneath Sarah's feet trembled violently, and the house began to collapse. As the darkness and the light collided, the creatures dissolved into nothingness, their forms fading into the ether. Miss Raven's scream echoed one last time before it, too, was swallowed by the light. And then silence. The world around Sarah dissolved, and when she opened her eyes, she was back where she had started. The forest bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The house was gone. The creatures, Miss Raven, gone. It was over. The weight of the darkness that had consumed her was finally lifted. She was free. But as Sarah stood in the quiet forest, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house was gone, yes, but so was she. She had been transformed, broken, and remade. And though she was free, she knew that darkness, true darkness, would never let her forget. The house had taken everything. But in the end, it was Sarah who had destroyed it. And somewhere deep inside her, she could feel the pulse of something new, something dark, something that would never be truly gone.